Bound to the beast. A wolf-shifter prince is forced into a political marriage with a witch to stop a brewing war. But the witch has her own curse. She dreams every night of a wolf that kills her. The prince is that wolf. Before we get to our story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new story. Bound to the beast. The treaty lay sprawled across the mahogany table like a death sentence written in gold ink. Prince Kieran Blackwood traced the ornate lettering with one callous finger, his jaw clenched so tightly that his molars ached. The parchment bore the seals of both kingdoms, his father's wolf's head pressed in midnight wax, and the Thornwick Coven's twisted thorn in deep crimson. "You will marry the witch," his father, King Magnus, said without preamble. The words hung in the air of the council chamber like smoke, thick and suffocating. "The ceremony will take place at the next full moon. 3 days hence." Kieran's hand stilled on the document. "And if I refuse? Then we go to war." Magnus' voice carried the weight of stone and steel. "The Thornwick Coven grows stronger by the day. Their magic has corrupted the northern forests, turned our hunting grounds into twisted nightmares where our wolves dare not tread. This alliance is our only chance at peace." Through the tall windows, Kieran could see the courtyard where his pack members trained in human form, their movements precise and deadly despite their human limitations. Soon, they would shift and run beneath the moon, as was their nature. But that freedom felt as distant as the stars now. "What do we know of her?" Kieran asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Lord Aldrich, his father's chief advisor, cleared his throat nervously. "Lady Lyra Thornwick is the Coven's most powerful practitioner after her grandmother, the High Witch Morwen. She's rumored to be quite beautiful, my lord. 23 years of age, well-educated in both the magical and mundane arts." "Rumors." Kieran's laugh was bitter. "What aren't you telling me?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, Magnus spoke. "There are whispers that she's cursed, son. Plagued by nightmares that have grown worse over the years. But curses can be broken, and nightmares are just dreams. What matters is that this union will bind our peoples together with magic stronger than any army." Kieran rose from his chair, the wood scraping against stone. At 26, he was in his prime, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made both wolves and humans take notice. His dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and his eyes held the golden flecks that marked him as a true alpha. Those same eyes now burned with barely contained fury. "You're asking me to marry a stranger," he said. "Someone whose very blood is antithetical to everything we are. I'm commanding you to save our kingdom." Magnus' voice rose, and for a moment, Kieran caught a glimpse of the wolf beneath his father's human facade. "The witch covens have been our enemies for generations, yes. But now they offer alliance through marriage. Would you rather see our forests burned and our people scattered than accept their offered hand?" The weight of responsibility settled on Kieran's shoulders like a mantle of lead. He was the crown prince, the future alpha of the largest wolf pack in the northern kingdoms. His personal desires meant nothing compared to the safety of his people. "Tell me about the dreams," he said quietly. Lord Aldrich shifted uncomfortably. "The reports are unsettling, my lord. It's said that Lady Lyra dreams every night of being hunted by a great black wolf. In these dreams, the wolf always catches her, always kills her. She wakes screaming." A chill ran down Kieran's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through the stone walls. His wolf form was indeed massive and black as midnight, with eyes that gleamed gold in the darkness. But surely it was coincidence. Witches were known for their prophetic abilities. Perhaps she simply feared what their union might bring. "When do I meet her?" he asked, resignation heavy in his voice. "Tomorrow," Magnus replied. "She arrives with a small retinue. You'll have 2 days to become acquainted before the ceremony. 2 days to court a woman who dreamed of his death. 2 days to convince a witch to bind herself to a wolf. 2 days to save a kingdom that depended on a union that felt doomed from the start." As Kieran left the council chamber, his footsteps echoing in the stone corridors, he wondered if this marriage would end the war between their peoples or start an entirely different kind of battle, one fought not with swords and claws, but with hearts and souls that might be too damaged to ever truly unite. The moon was waxing toward full, and with each passing hour, the pull of his wolf nature grew stronger. Soon, he would have no choice but to shift and run. And somewhere out there, a witch was traveling toward his castle, carrying dreams of death and prophecies he couldn't yet understand. 3 days until the wedding. 3 nights until his fate and hers would be sealed in moonlight and magic. The beast within him stirred restlessly, as if it knew that everything was about to change. The doors to the great hall opened with a sound like thunder, and Kieran's world tilted on its axis. Lady Lyra entered beside an elderly woman who could only be the infamous High Witch Morwen Thornwick, but Kieran barely spared the grandmother a glance. All his attention focused on the younger woman like a wolf scenting prey. She had changed from her traveling clothes into a gown that seemed woven from shadow and starlight. The deep blue fabric clung to her curves before flowing in ethereal waves to the floor, and silver embroidery traced patterns across the bodice that made Kieran's eyes water if he looked too closely. Protection sigils, he realized. She wore her magic like armor. But it was her face that stopped his heart. Up close, she was devastating, high cheekbones that could cut glass, full lips the color of winter roses, and those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. When she looked at him, he saw recognition flicker across her features, followed immediately by something that might have been terror. "Your Majesty," High Witch Morwen said, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. She was a tiny woman, barely reaching Kieran's chest, but power radiated from her like heat from a furnace. "Allow me to present my granddaughter, Lady Lyra Thornwick." Lyra stepped forward and executed a perfect curtsy, but Kieran didn't miss how her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her skirts. "Your Highness," she said, and her voice was like silver bells wrapped in velvet. "I am honored by your hospitality." Kieran bowed in return, deeper than protocol required. "The honor is mine, Lady Lyra. Welcome to Blackwood Castle." When he straightened, their eyes met again, and the air between them crackled with tension. Her pupils dilated, and he caught the faintest intake of breath. Whatever she saw in his face made her take an involuntary step backward. "Perhaps," Magnus interjected smoothly, "the young people would like to become acquainted before dinner? The gardens are lovely in the evening light." It wasn't a suggestion. Kieran offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Lyra placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. Even through the fabric of his jacket, her touch burned like ice and fire combined. They walked in silence through the corridors leading to the castle's extensive gardens, the only sounds their footsteps on stone and the whisper of Lyra's skirts. Kieran was acutely aware of her beside him, the way she held herself with perfect posture despite her obvious fear, the subtle scent of her magic that made his wolf pace restlessly, the careful distance she maintained between them. The gardens were indeed beautiful in the evening light. Roses climbed trellises in riots of color, and carefully manicured paths wound between fountains and topiary. But Lyra seemed to see none of it. Her attention remained fixed on Kieran, studying him with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that might save her life. "You may speak freely here," Kieran said finally, stopping beside a fountain carved with scenes of wolves running beneath a full moon. "These gardens are protected by old magic. Nothing said here can be overheard or used against us." Lyra's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know of protection spells?" "I know many things about magic, Lady Lyra. One must understand one's enemies to survive." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, and he saw her flinch. "Forgive me. I didn't mean." "You meant exactly what you said." Her voice was steady, but he heard the hurt beneath it. "We are enemies, aren't we? Your people and mine. This marriage is just a temporary truce dressed up in silk and flowers." Kieran studied her face, looking for deception or manipulation, but found only honesty and a bone-deep weariness that seemed far too old for someone barely past 20. "Is that what you believe?" "I believe that you're going to kill me," she said quietly, and the words hit him like a physical blow. "Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday. I've seen it in my dreams every night for 5 years. A great black wolf with golden eyes, hunting me through a forest that burns with silver fire. It always catches me. It always. She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. Kieran's blood turned to ice in his veins. 5 years. She'd been dreaming of his death for 5 years, since before either of them knew this marriage would be arranged. Lyra, don't. She held up a hand, silver light flickering briefly around her fingers before she controlled it. Don't tell me they're just dreams, or that I'm being foolish, or that the magic is confused. I know what I've seen. I know what you are. Then why are you here? The question tore from his throat like a growl. If you truly believe I'll kill you, why agree to this marriage? For the first time since she'd arrived, Lyra smiled, and it was the saddest thing Kieran had ever seen. Because if I don't marry you, the war between our peoples will destroy thousands of innocents. Because my grandmother raised me to put duty before personal desire. And because... She paused, looking away toward the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Because I'm tired of running from nightmares. If I'm going to die, at least this way it will serve a purpose. The great hall had been transformed for the evening's feast. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, while garlands of late autumn flowers, deep reds, burnished golds, and midnight purples adorned every surface. The long tables groaned under the weight of the feast, roasted venison, honey-glazed fowl, fresh bread, still steaming from the ovens, and delicacies from both kingdoms meant to celebrate the union of their peoples. Kieran escorted Lyra to the high table, acutely aware of every eye in the hall following their progress. His pack members filled the lower tables, warriors, scouts, and nobles who had served his family for generations. They watched the witch with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Beside them sat Lyra's small retinue, 3 women in dark robes whose faces remained hidden in shadow, and a tall man with silver hair who radiated the same magical energy as Lyra herself. My counsel, Lyra murmured as they took their seats. Aunt Seraphina, Cousin Morgana, Lady Raven, and my grandmother's advisor, Master Aldwin. They're here to witness the binding ceremony and ensure the magical elements are properly executed. Kieran nodded, filing away the information. Any one of them could be ally or enemy, depending on how this marriage ultimately played out. At the high table, his father raised his goblet in a toast that echoed through the suddenly quiet hall. Tonight, we celebrate not just the union of 2 houses, but the dawn of a new age, Magnus proclaimed, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. For too long, wolf and witch have been enemies. Tomorrow, that enmity ends forever. The assembled crowd raised their cups and drank, though Kieran noticed that the enthusiasm was decidedly mixed. His own people looked resigned at best, while the witches' expressions remained unreadable behind their magical veils. A new age, Lyra repeated quietly, lifting her own goblet. Her wine was pale as moonlight, unlike the rich red that filled everyone else's cup. I wonder if it will be better than the old one. It has to be, Kieran replied, clinking his goblet against hers. The alternative is unthinkable. As the feast progressed, Kieran found himself studying not just Lyra, but the interplay between their 2 peoples. Conversation was stilted, formal, with invisible barriers as solid as castle walls separating wolf from witch. How could they rule over such division? How could a marriage forge peace when the very air crackled with mistrust? You're thinking very loudly, Lyra observed, cutting a delicate piece of venison with surgical precision. Your thoughts taste of frustration and worry. You can taste thoughts? Kieran asked, startled. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, the first genuine expression of amusement he'd seen from her. Not precisely. But emotions have flavor when you know how to sense them. Yours are particularly intense. What do they taste like? The question slipped out before he could stop it, far more intimate than appropriate for a public setting. Lyra's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked down at her plate. Storm winds and pine forests, she said so quietly he had to lean closer to hear. Wild things barely held in check. It's not unpleasant. The admission hung between them like a confession. Kieran felt his wolf stir with interest, drawn by something in her scent that his human mind couldn't identify. Up close, he could see the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. The faint purple shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. "When did you last sleep without dreams?" he asked. "I don't remember." The honest answer seemed to surprise her as much as him. "It's been so long that dreamless sleep feels like a myth, like something that happens to other people but never to me." An idea began to form in Kieran's mind, dangerous and probably foolish, but potentially their only hope. What if you didn't sleep alone? Lyra's fork clattered against her plate. "I beg your pardon?" "Not what you're thinking," Kieran said hastily, though heat crept up his neck at her scandalized expression. "I mean, what if the dreams only come when you're vulnerable and alone? Wolf packs sleep together for protection. Maybe human presence would ward off whatever force sends you those visions. You want to sleep in the same room as me?" Her voice was carefully neutral, but he caught the flutter of her pulse in the hollow of her throat. "I want to help you get one full night's rest before our wedding day," he corrected. "You're exhausted, Lyra. When did you last feel truly safe?" The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her composure cracked for just a moment, revealing a depth of loneliness that made Kieran's chest ache. I don't know if I ever have." "Then let me try." He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Not as your husband-to-be, but as someone who understands what it means to have a beast inside that you can't always control. Trust me for one night. What's the worst that could happen?" "You could kill me in my sleep," she pointed out with dark humor. "If I was going to kill you, I wouldn't need to wait until you were unconscious," Kieran replied pragmatically. "Besides, if the dreams are truly prophetic, then we need to understand them before the wedding ceremony tomorrow. The magical binding will make everything more complicated." Lyra considered this, absently tracing patterns on the tablecloth with one finger. Where she touched, tiny flowers bloomed in the fabric, an unconscious display of magic that made several nearby wolves tense. "The binding ceremony," she said slowly. "You understand what it will do to us?" "Unite our kingdoms through magical marriage bonds," Kieran recited the formal language. "Make us partners in power and purpose." "It's more than that." Lyra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The ritual will link our very souls, Kieran. Every emotion, every dream, every fear, we'll share them all. If there truly is some dark force compelling you to hurt me, the binding will give it access to my magic as well as yours." Ice formed in Kieran's veins. "Are you saying the ceremony itself might trigger the prophecy?" "I'm saying we have less than 18 hours to figure out what my dreams really mean," Lyra replied. "Because once we're bound, there may be no way to change what's coming." Around them, the feast continued with forced merriment, but Kieran felt as if the world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Tomorrow evening, they would speak vows that would tie their souls together forever. If Lyra was right about the dreams being prophetic, if some dark magic would indeed compel him to kill her, then the binding ceremony might doom them both. "We'll figure it out," he said with more confidence than he felt. "Tonight, we research everything we can about prophetic dreams and binding curses. Tomorrow, we find answers. And if we don't?" Kieran met her storm-gray eyes directly. "Then we face whatever comes together. But I refuse to believe that fate is written in stone, Lyra. There's always another choice, always another path. We just have to be brave enough to take it." High Witch Morwen rose from her seat at that moment, her ancient voice cutting through the hall's chatter like a blade through silk. "It grows late," she announced, "and tomorrow brings great magic. Perhaps it's time for rest." The dismissal was clearly directed at the younger generation, but Kieran caught the meaningful look she gave her granddaughter. Even the High Witch seemed nervous about what tomorrow might bring. As the hall began to empty, Kieran offered Lyra his arm once more. "My offer stands," he said quietly. "You don't have to face the dreams alone tonight." Lyra looked up at him for a long moment, searching his face for something he couldn't name. Finally, she nodded. "All right. But if I wake up screaming, don't say I didn't warn you." "I'll consider myself warned," Kieran replied, leading her from the hall. Behind them, he could feel the weight of watching eyes. His father's calculating gaze, her grandmother's ancient wisdom, the mixed curiosity and concern of both their peoples. Tomorrow, they would be bound by magic stronger than blood or bone. Tonight, they would face her nightmares together and pray they could find a way to change the ending of a story that seemed determined to end in tragedy. The moon was rising toward full, and Kieran's wolf stirred restlessly as they climbed the stairs to the guest chambers. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, he had the unsettling feeling that by morning, everything would be different. One way or another. Kieran regained consciousness to the sound of sobbing and the acrid scent of magic gone wrong. His head throbbed where it had struck the stone wall, and his chest burned where Lyra's power had hit him, but he was alive. More importantly, the silver fire that had been consuming the room had died down to a faint glow around Lyra's trembling form. She sat huddled on the bed, arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming down her face as she rocked back and forth. The room showed signs of magical chaos, scorch marks on the walls, the heavy curtains torn and smoking, ice crystals covering every surface despite the fire still burning in the grate. "Lyra," Kieran said gently, pushing himself up from the floor. Every muscle in his body protested the movement, but he ignored the pain. "It's over. You're awake now." Her head snapped up at the sound of his voice, and relief flooded her features when she saw him moving. "Kieran. Oh gods, I could have killed you." "I saw you in the dream, and when I woke up," she scrambled off the bed toward him, her hands hovering uncertainly as if she wanted to touch him, but was afraid of causing more harm. "I'm fine," he assured her, catching her hands in his before she could pull away. Her skin was ice-cold despite the magical fire that had been pouring from her moments before. "What happened? You were calling out about reaching something, and then—" "I made it to the pool," Lyra said, her voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "For the first time in 5 years, I actually reached the water. But when I looked into its surface..." She shuddered. "I saw you, the real you, trapped beneath the water. Not the wolf from my dreams, but you as you are now, drowning, reaching up toward me with such desperate need in your eyes." Kieran felt cold that had nothing to do with the ice crystals decorating the chamber. "What does it mean?" "I don't know. But when I plunged my hands into the pool to try to save you, I woke up and you were here, and for a moment I couldn't tell what was dream and what was real." She touched his face with shaking fingers, as if reassuring herself of his solidity. "The line between sleeping and waking is dissolving, Kieran. The magic is getting stronger." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them, followed by Magnus' voice raised in concern. "Prince Kieran. We felt the magical disturbance throughout the castle. Are you harmed?" Kieran helped Lyra to her feet, noting how she swayed with exhaustion. "I'm unharmed, father. Lady Lyra experienced a difficult dream, but she's recovering now." "Thank the gods," came his father's relieved response. "The binding ceremony is in less than 12 hours. We cannot afford any complications." The reminder sent a jolt of urgency through both of them. 12 hours until their souls would be permanently joined. 12 hours to solve a mystery that had plagued Lyra for 5 years. "We need help," Lyra said quietly once the footsteps in the corridor had faded. "I can't interpret these dreams alone, and you don't have enough magical knowledge to guide me. We need someone who understands both prophetic magic and soul binding." "Your grandmother," Kieran realized. "My grandmother," Lyra agreed. "She's the most powerful witch in 3 kingdoms, and she helped design the binding ceremony. If anyone can tell us what the dreams really mean and how they might interact with the soul bond, it's her." They found High Witch Morwen in the castle's ancient library, surrounded by books that looked far older than the stone walls containing them. She looked up as they entered, her ancient eyes taking in their disheveled appearance and the lingering traces of wild magic that clung to Lyra's clothes. "The dreams are changing," she said without preamble. It wasn't a question. "Grandmother, I need your help." Lyra moved to kneel beside the elderly witch's chair, her earlier composure completely abandoned in her desperation. "The binding ceremony tomorrow, will it make the prophecy stronger?" Morwen studied her granddaughter for a long moment, then turned that penetrating gaze to Kieran. "Sit, both of you." This will require the full truth, and I'm too old to crane my neck looking up at you. They settled into chairs across from her, and Kieran was struck by how small and fragile she appeared. It was easy to forget, looking at her now, that this woman commanded power that could level cities. "Tell me about tonight's dream," Morwen commanded. "Every detail, no matter how strange it seems." Lyra recounted the night's events, the changed dream, reaching the pool for the first time, seeing Kieran trapped beneath the water, waking to attack him with her magic. Morwen listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "And you, young wolf," she said when Lyra finished. "What did you feel when her magic struck you?" Kieran considered the question carefully. Pain, certainly. But also recognition. As if her magic was familiar somehow, though I've never experienced witch power before. "Because it's not foreign to you," Morwen said quietly. "It's part of you now, just as you're becoming part of her." "The binding has already begun." "That's impossible," Lyra protested. "The ceremony isn't until tomorrow evening." "The formal ceremony creates the permanent bond," Morwen corrected. "But true soulmates begin connecting the moment they meet. The magic recognizes what the heart knows before the mind accepts it." She turned to Kieran. "You felt drawn to her from the moment you saw her, didn't you? Not just attraction, but something deeper. A sense of completion." Kieran's throat felt dry. "Yes. And you," Morwen continued, focusing on Lyra. "For the first time in years, you felt safe with a man who should represent your greatest fear. You trusted him enough to let him guard your sleep, to witness your vulnerability." Lyra's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't deny it. "The dreams have been preparing you both," Morwen continued. "Not showing you a fixed future, but teaching you how to save each other. Lyra, in your dream tonight, what was different about the wolf?" "It wasn't there," Lyra realized suddenly. "The wolf that's hunted me for 5 years, it wasn't in the forest at all. I ran to the pool not because something was chasing me, but because I knew someone needed saving. And when you saw Kieran drowning in the pool, I didn't hesitate. I plunged my hands into the water immediately, even though I knew it might trap me too." Lyra's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The dreams weren't about my death. They were about choice. About whether I'd be willing to risk everything to save him." "But the wolf in the earlier dreams," Kieran interjected. "The one that killed her every night for years, what does that represent?" Morwen's expression grew grave. "That, I'm afraid, represents the binding ceremony itself. Or rather, what will happen if you undertake it while still carrying the curse." "What curse?" both Lyra and Kieran demanded simultaneously. "The curse that's been placed on your bloodline, young prince," Morwen said heavily. "A curse designed to activate during magical bonding, turning wolf nature against witch magic. It's why the dreams began when Lyra's power fully manifested, her magic sensed the curse waiting in your blood and tried to warn her." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of wind against the windows. Kieran felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, as though everything he thought he knew about himself had been revealed as illusion. "Who would curse my bloodline?" he asked finally. "And why?" "Someone who wanted to ensure that wolves and witches could never truly unite," Morwen replied. "Someone who benefits from the ongoing war between our peoples. The curse is old, Kieran, probably placed on your great-grandfather's line. It's been dormant for generations, waiting for the right trigger." "The binding ceremony," Lyra whispered. "The binding ceremony," Morwen confirmed. "If you speak the vows while the curse is active, it will override your conscious will. The wolf will kill the witch, the alliance will shatter, and war will consume both kingdoms. Whoever placed the curse will have achieved their goal." Kieran's hands clenched into fists. "How do we break it?" "The same way Lyra's dreams have been teaching you," Morwen said with the first smile they'd seen from her. "By choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, sacrifice over self-preservation. The pool in Lyra's dream, it represents purification, the washing away of old curses and ancient hatred. But it requires both of you to enter it willingly." "The pool is real?" Lyra asked. "It's as real as you make it," Morwen replied cryptically. "Magic of this level doesn't obey normal rules of physical existence. If you believe strongly enough, if your need is great enough, you can bring the dream into reality. How? Kieran demanded. Together, Morwen said simply. The curse affects both of you, so you must face it together. Tonight, before the ceremony tomorrow, you must both enter the dream. Lyra's magic can bring you into her dream state, and your wolf nature can anchor you both to the waking world. Find the pool, enter it together, and let it wash away the curse that would destroy you both. It sounded impossible, dangerous beyond measure. But as Kieran looked at Lyra, this brave, determined woman who'd been fighting prophecy alone for years, he knew they had no choice. What do we need to do? He asked. Morwen smiled again, and this time it held genuine warmth. What you've both been doing all along, child. Choose each other, despite the fear, despite the risk, despite the certainty that it might destroy you both. That's what breaks curses, not magic or power, but the simple courage to love someone more than you fear losing them. Outside the library windows, dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky. In a few hours, guests would begin arriving for the wedding ceremony. By evening, they would either be free of the curse and bound in love, or dead by Kieran's own hand. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Kieran felt hope stirring in his chest. They had found their enemy, understood the true nature of the threat, and discovered a way to fight it. Now all they had to do was survive the battle. They woke to the sound of bells ringing throughout the castle, calling all to witness the royal wedding. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in gold and amber, and Kieran realized with a start that they had been dreamwalking for nearly 6 hours. The ceremony, Lyra gasped, sitting up abruptly. Her hair was damp with sweat, and exhaustion lined her face, but her eyes were clear and free of the haunted look that had shadowed them since her arrival. Starts in 2 hours, Kieran confirmed, checking the position of the sun. His body ached as though he'd run for miles, every muscle protesting the magical ordeal they'd endured. But the oppressive weight that had pressed against his consciousness, the curse he'd carried unknowingly for years, was gone completely. Morwen stirred from her chair by the window, where she'd been maintaining the protective wards during their absence. It worked, she said, and it wasn't a question. The relief in her ancient voice was profound. I can feel the difference in both your magical signatures. The curse has been completely cleansed. What about Aldrich? Kieran asked, rage kindling in his chest as he thought of his father's trusted advisor. He's been manipulating our families for decades, positioning us for this exact moment. Aldrich has been dealt with, Magnus said, stepping into the room. His face was grim with satisfaction. When you didn't wake immediately, I had him questioned under truth serum. He confessed everything, the curse placed on our bloodline 3 generations ago, his role in arranging this marriage to trigger it, his employers who wanted permanent war between our peoples. Employers? Lyra asked, accepting the robe that Morwen handed her and wrapping it around her rumpled dress. A coalition of human kingdoms who benefit from selling weapons to both sides of our conflict, Magnus replied with disgust. They've been profiting from our mutual hatred for generations. Aldrich was their inside agent, working to ensure the war never ended. Was? Kieran caught the past tense. He resisted arrest, Magnus said simply. It didn't end well for him. They spent the next hour preparing for the ceremony that would now be a celebration rather than a trap. Lyra was attended by her female relatives, who had arrived that morning with wedding garments fit for a queen. The dress was a masterpiece of witch craftsmanship, silk that seemed woven from moonbeams, embroidered with silver threads that formed protection sigils, and a train that flowed like liquid starlight. Kieran's preparations were simpler but no less significant. The formal jacket he wore had belonged to his grandfather and great-grandfather, passed down through generations of Blackwood princes. But now, instead of carrying a hidden curse, it felt like a blessing, a connection to ancestors who would have been proud to see their bloodline finally free. The ceremony took place in the castle's great hall, transformed for the occasion into something magical. Hundreds of candles cast dancing light on stone walls draped with flowers from both kingdoms, roses and lilacs from the human lands, silver-leafed branches and night-blooming jasmine from the witch territories. Representatives from both peoples filled every seat, watching with expressions that ranged from hope to skepticism to outright curiosity. But as Kieran waited at the altar and watched Lyra walk down the aisle on her grandmother's arm, none of that mattered. She was radiant, beautiful beyond description, and when their eyes met across the distance, he felt the same jolt of recognition that had struck him that first evening. His mate. His equal. His partner in all things. The binding ceremony itself was unlike any wedding ritual from either tradition. Morwen and Magnus shared the officiating duties, weaving together wolf pack bonds and witch magic into something entirely new. Ancient words in both their languages filled the air, while silver light began to gather around Kieran and Lyra as their individual magical signatures prepared to merge. Do you, Prince Kieran of the Blackwood Pack, take Lady Lyra of the Thornwick Coven as your mate, your magical partner, your equal in all things? Magnus asked, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I do, Kieran replied, his voice steady despite the power building around them. In human form and wolf, in waking and sleeping, in peace and war, I choose her as my own. Do you, Lady Lyra of the Thornwick Coven, take Prince Kieran of the Blackwood Pack as your mate, your magical partner, your equal in all things? Morwen asked, her ancient voice filled with warmth and satisfaction. I do, Lyra responded, her voice ringing clear and strong. In magic and mundane, in light and shadow, in joy and sorrow, I choose him as my own. The binding began immediately. Not the violent, compulsive magic that the curse would have created, but something beautiful and mutual. Silver light from Lyra's magic intertwined with the golden glow of Kieran's wolf nature, creating patterns of breathtaking complexity as their souls recognized each other and began to merge. Kieran felt it happening, Lyra's thoughts becoming accessible to his own, her emotions flowing into him like warm honey, her memories of loneliness and fear being soothed by his unwavering strength and protection. In return, she received his memories of pack loyalty and fierce love, his wolf's instinctive recognition of her as mate and equal, his human heart's desperate need to keep her safe. But more than shared thoughts and feelings, the binding created something entirely new, a magical synergy that made them stronger together than either could be alone. Kieran felt his wolf nature expand and deepen, made more complete by Lyra's silver magic. She gasped as her power grew exponentially, enhanced by the raw strength of his supernatural heritage. The light surrounding them reached a crescendo, then settled into a gentle glow that would mark them as soul-bound for the rest of their lives. When it faded, when the ceremony was complete, Kieran and Lyra looked at each other with new eyes, seeing not just the person they'd fallen in love with, but their literal other half. It is done, Morwen announced to the assembled crowd. Let all witness that wolf and witch are no longer enemies, but family. Let this union mark the beginning of a new age of peace and cooperation between our peoples. The hall erupted in cheers and applause, but Kieran barely heard it. All his attention focused on the woman beside him, his wife now, his soul-bound partner, the other half of his very being. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. No more nightmares, he asked softly when they broke apart. Only dreams of our future, Lyra replied, her storm-gray eyes sparkling with joy and mischief. Though I suspect they'll be quite interesting, married to a wolf prince. Interesting is one word for it, Kieran agreed, pulling her close as their guests began the celebration that would continue far into the night. Are you ready for this? For ruling two kingdoms, managing peace between peoples who've been enemies for generations, dealing with whatever political challenges come next. With you. Lyra smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. I'm ready for anything. Epilogue, 1 year later. The Crystal Forest had become their private sanctuary, accessible now through shared dreams that brought only joy and peace. They came here often in the quiet hours between sleeping and waking, walking hand in hand through singing trees while discussing everything from trade agreements between their kingdoms to the names they were considering for the child Lyra carried. What about Luna for a girl? Lyra suggested as they settled beside the pool that had saved them both. The water now reflected the aurora sky above, beautiful and peaceful rather than dark and threatening. Luna Blackwood Thornwick, Kieran mused, testing how it sounded. I like it. Strong name for a strong child. She'll be powerful, Lyra said, resting her hand on the gentle curve of her belly. I can already feel her magic, and your wolf recognizes her as Pack. She'll be loved, Kieran corrected, covering her hand with his larger one. Power is just a tool. Love is what makes us who we are. In the waking world, their marriage had indeed brought peace between the kingdoms. Trade routes had reopened, magical knowledge was being shared freely, and the next generation of children was growing up seeing wolf and witch as allies rather than enemies. There had been challenges, political maneuvering, cultural misunderstandings, the occasional extremist who preferred the old ways of hatred and war. But they had faced everything together, drawing strength from their bond and the absolute trust they'd forged in that long-ago dream. Kieran's wolf nature was perfectly balanced by Lyra's witch wisdom, while her magical power was grounded by his steady strength and pack loyalty. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked suddenly, the question she'd asked many times in their first months together. Marrying someone you barely knew, binding your soul to a witch who dreamed of your death? Never, Kieran replied without hesitation, the answer he always gave because it was absolutely true. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Everything else, the peace, the political success, the happiness of our people, that's just a bonus. Even when I accidentally freeze the castle's entire water supply when I'm having a nightmare? Even then. Though perhaps we should work on better dream control before the baby arrives. They laughed together, the sound echoing through the crystal forest like music. In the distance, they could hear the approach of dawn, the real dawn, in the real world, where they would wake in each other's arms and begin another day of ruling their joint kingdoms with wisdom and love. But for now, in this space between dreams and waking where they'd first learned to trust each other, they were simply Kieran and Lyra, wolf and witch, husband and wife, two souls who had chosen love over fear and changed the world in the process. The nightmares were over. The dreams were just beginning. Extended epilogue, 5 years later. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the corridors of Blackwood Castle as Princess Luna chased her younger brother through the halls, both of them flickering between human and wolf form with the casual ease of those born to dual nature. At 4 years old, Luna had inherited her mother's storm-gray eyes and her father's golden hair, along with a magical signature that made even Morwen shake her head in amazement. Prince Marcus, barely 2, was still learning to control his shifts, occasionally sprouting wolf ears when excited or frustrated. "Mama," Luna called as she burst into the royal chambers, her little brother tumbling after her in full wolf pup form. Marcus got stuck again. Lyra looked up from the correspondence she'd been reviewing. Trade agreements with the southern kingdoms, magical research proposals, and a rather heated letter from a group of traditionalists who still objected to mixed marriages. 5 years of ruling had taught her to handle politics with the same grace she once reserved for magic, though she still preferred spellcasting to diplomatic negotiations. "Let me see, little one," she said, kneeling down as Marcus shifted back to human form, his chubby toddler face scrunched with embarrassment. One of his hands remained stubbornly paw-shaped, fingers fused together and covered in dark fur. "It happens when he's excited," Luna explained with the serious air of an older sister. "Papa says it's normal, but Marcus doesn't like being different." "Different can be wonderful," Lyra assured them both, gently placing her hands over Marcus's transformed appendage. Silver light flowed from her fingers, not forcing the change, but encouraging his natural magic to find its balance. Slowly, the paw melted back into a normal toddler hand. "There," she said, kissing his forehead. "Remember, sweetheart, you're not less than others because you're both wolf and witch. You're more. You're the bridge between two worlds. Like you and Papa," Luna said, and the simple acceptance in her voice made Lyra's heart swell with pride. Their children were growing up in a world where such unions were normal, where the idea of wolves and witches as enemies was as foreign as flying horses. The chamber doors opened to admit Kieran, still in his formal council attire, but with his sleeves rolled up and his dark hair slightly disheveled, clear signs that he'd been dealing with the more hands-on aspects of kingship. At 31, he'd grown into his role with natural authority, respected by both wolves and witches for his fairness and strength. "Let me guess," he said, scooping Marcus into his arms while ruffling Luna's hair. "Someone had shifting troubles during lessons with Master Henrik?" "He turned into a wolf pup in the middle of learning letters," Luna reported. Master Henrik wasn't angry, but some of the other children laughed. Kieran's expression darkened slightly. Even 5 years after their marriage had brought peace, there were still those who harbored old prejudices, and children often reflected their parents' attitudes. "What did you do?" "I may have accidentally frozen their inkwells," Luna admitted, looking unrepentant. "It wasn't on purpose. I just got angry and the magic happened." "We'll work on control," Lyra said diplomatically, though privately she was proud of her daughter's protective instincts. "But Luna, using magic when you're angry can be dangerous. Remember what we've taught you about emotional regulation." "Yes, Mama." As the children settled into their evening routine, Kieran and Lyra retreated to their private balcony overlooking the kingdom they'd built together. The view had become one of their favorite rituals, a few minutes of quiet to reconnect after the demands of ruling, parenting, and managing the complex politics of their joined realms. "How were the northern border talks?" Lyra asked, settling into the circle of Kieran's arms as they watched the sun set over lands that now knew peace. "Productive. The lumber disputes are resolved, and Chief Marheim has agreed to the new trade routes." Kieran's voice carried satisfaction, but also exhaustion. "Though I suspect we'll be dealing with similar issues for years to come. Generations of mistrust don't disappear overnight." "No, but they do disappear," Lyra said firmly. "Look at our children." To them, the idea that wolves and witches were ever enemies is as ridiculous as suggesting that night and day are at war. Each generation will find it easier than the last. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as lights began to twinkle throughout the valley below. The castle town had grown significantly since their marriage, becoming a hub of trade and learning where people from both kingdoms came to share knowledge and build new relationships. "Lyra," Kieran said suddenly, his voice taking on the serious tone that meant important news was coming. "I received a letter today. From the Dragon Courts in the Eastern Mountains." Lyra tensed slightly. The Dragon Courts were even more isolated than the witch covens had been, their people remaining neutral in conflicts, but possessing magic that made even the most powerful witches seem mundane by comparison. "What did they want?" "A marriage alliance," Kieran said carefully, "between Luna and the Dragon Prince's youngest son. The boy is only 6 years old, but they're thinking ahead, proposing a betrothal that would unite our 3 peoples." The idea of arranging Luna's marriage when she was barely 4 years old made Lyra's maternal instincts flare, but she forced herself to consider it politically. Such alliances had been how they'd achieved peace with the witch covens after all. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think," Kieran said slowly, "that we should let Luna choose her own path when she's old enough to understand what that means. We found love by chance against all odds in impossible circumstances. But we shouldn't assume that arranged marriages are the only way to build political alliances. Even if refusing might mean missing an opportunity for lasting peace with the Dragon Courts, even then." Kieran turned her to face him, his golden eyes serious in the gathering twilight. "We've built something beautiful here, Lyra. Not just political stability, but genuine friendship between peoples who were enemies for generations. That didn't happen because we forced ourselves to love each other. It happened because we chose to, despite every reason not to. And you think our children should have the same choice?" "I think our children should have better choices than we did," Kieran replied. "They're growing up in a world where wolf-witch marriages are celebrated, not feared. Where children learn about both traditions from birth. When Luna and Marcus are old enough to choose partners, they'll have options we couldn't even dream of." Lyra smiled, leaning up to kiss her husband softly. "Have I mentioned lately that I love your idealistic streak?" "Only every day," Kieran replied, grinning. "Though I prefer to think of it as realistic optimism." A crash from inside the castle interrupted their romantic moment, followed by Luna's voice raised in a very unprincess-like shout. "Marcus, you can't eat the curtains just because you're in wolf form." "Duty calls," Lyra sighed, but she was smiling as they headed back inside to deal with their magically gifted, occasionally destructive, absolutely perfect children. Later that night, after the children were finally asleep and the castle had settled into peaceful quiet, Kieran and Lyra lay in their bed sharing the kind of intimate conversation that had become the foundation of their partnership. "Do you ever dream of the crystal forest anymore?" Kieran asked, his fingers threading through her silver hair. "Sometimes," Lyra replied, tracing patterns on his chest. "But now it's always peaceful. No running, no fear, just beautiful music and perfect clarity." "What about you? Any dreams of hunting or darkness?" "Never. My dreams are all about the future now, watching our children grow, seeing what kind of leaders they become, wondering what the kingdoms will look like in another generation." "And are you happy with what you see in those dreams?" Kieran was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "More than happy. Grateful. 5 years ago, I thought my greatest achievement would be maintaining the status quo, keeping our people safe through strength and isolation. Now," he gestured toward the window, where they could see the lights of a thriving, integrated community. "Now I see a world where our great-grandchildren will grow up thinking that cooperation and understanding are natural, where the idea of war between magical peoples will seem as ancient and ridiculous as believing the earth is flat." "Assuming we don't mess it up," Lyra said with a slight laugh. "We won't," Kieran said with quiet confidence. "Because we have something that most rulers don't. We actually understand the people we're governing. We've been on both sides of the fear and mistrust. We know what it takes to bridge seemingly impossible differences. And if we're wrong? If there are threats we can't foresee, problems our love story approach can't solve, then we'll face them the same way we faced everything else," Kieran replied, pulling her closer. "Together, with courage and creativity and an absolute refusal to let fear make our decisions for us." As sleep began to claim them both, Lyra felt the familiar warmth of their soul bond settling around them like a protective blanket. In her dreams, she knew, she would walk again through crystal forests that sang with perfect harmony, beside pools that reflected not prophecies of doom, but visions of hope. And somewhere in the nursery down the hall, their children dreamed too, dreams of a future where magic and mundane, wolf and witch, human and supernatural all lived in harmony, because that was the only world they'd ever known. The nightmares that had once promised death and destruction were gone forever. In their place, an entire kingdom dreamed of tomorrow. The end. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of fated mates and paranormal love connections.